The next presenter, Caroline Chylinski, was unfortunately unable to come today, but Sue McCord has kindly offered to step in and deliver Caroline's presentation, which will be about stocking density.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So I'm going to present a short summary of a project that Carolyn did with Spring Sheep Dairy this year. And this was following actually the study that we did at Grasslands that Brad and Amber have just been talking about. And one of the things that we observed is that even though the lambs that when we get lambs from a single source, sometimes they behave quite differently depending on what type of system that you put them in. And we made the observation that in some environments, some of the lambs were actually growing better than in other environments. And one of the things that was different between the study that we did and when we were observing lambs on a commercial farm is the stocking density that we used. We had the luxury of quite a large rearing environment, much bigger sheds than you would ever find on a commercial farm. And so, they have a lot more space available. And so one question could simply be, well, if the growth rate differences you're seeing, is that just simply because of stocking density? So what we wanted to look at here was to actually test that theory. So as these guys have just described, the dairy sheep industry, particularly the large-scale ones, are using artificial rearing. We want to be able to utilise all of our offspring. We don't want the negative perception of the alternative to that. The lambs are separated at about 2 or 3 days of age to make sure they get good colostrum intake from the ewes, and then they're reared indoors for at least about 3 weeks until they're at least about 10 kilos in live weight before they're put outside, and then continue milk feeding until weaning at around about 5 or 6 weeks. The females are largely kept for replacements and the males go for meat production. So it's not just growth rate that we're really interested in. So we want nice big lambs, but we also want healthy lambs. We want lambs that have been raised under a good welfare production system, and we want lifetime productivity out of them. There's no point in having a great lamb at 12 weeks of age that doesn't subsequently become a really good milking ewe or a really good meat producing lamb. So we need lifetime productivity as well. But we know that the rearing system that we put these animals through is really critically important for that lifetime productivity. We need to set them up properly for their future. So this study is just going to be presenting the data from the 3 weeks of indoor rearing observations that were made. So the lambs were reared in an indoor environment. They were given ad-lib milk replacer with an automatic feeder. They were in pens of 3 square metres, or 3 metres by 3 metres, so it's 9 square metre pens. 20 to 24 lambs per pen is the normal sort of stocking density. And so our question was, if we lowered that stocking density, would we see a change in some of the production traits such as average daily gain or health? Now, previous studies have shown in feedlot systems that increasing stocking density can impact on the weight gains if you don't give them enough access to feed troughs. They don't have as much equal access to feed, and therefore that can impact their growth performance. And also stocking density can adversely impact milk yield and quality in dairy ewes. But there's no data out there that actually looks at the effect of stocking density in a very young lamb on their performance. So that's what this study was designed to do. So essentially very simple. We had the same size pens. In one pen we had 10 lambs, in the other pen we had 20 lambs. And we measured average daily gain by measuring their live weight once a week for the 3 weeks that they were in the pens. So when we look at average daily gain, what you see here is gain here over the weeks of the trial up here. So we've split this into the first week, the second week, the third week, and then this is after they've actually gone outside the shed. The first thing that you can notice here on all of these graphs is these error bars here. Now what that's demonstrating is the huge variation that we saw in growth rate in either the low density group, these red ones, or the high density group. So there was a massive variation within each of these groups. In the first week, what we see is that those lambs that are at low density, 10 lambs per pen, grew on average twice as fast as the ones that had 20 lambs per pen. These lambs didn't change pens all the way through. They stayed the same. By second week, average daily gain had increased in both groups and there was no difference between the low or the high stocking density. And the same thing by 2 to 3 weeks just before they went outside. there was a decline in average daily gain, but there was no difference between the stocking density. Likewise, when they went outdoors, there was no difference in their growth rates once they got put out into the paddock. They still had milk and meal available, so their feed inputs were exactly the same in these two periods. But what we do see is this big difference here. So what that is telling us is that there is something going on in that first week that's causing the lower growth rate, but also causing that huge variation in the growth performance of these lambs, and we need to try and unpick what that is. So, in terms of key results, as you see, there was a increased growth rate in the lower stocking density in that first week. Massive variation in the growth rates between the lambs within the groups as well as between the groups. So the next step is trying to unpick what's going on. So we're going to be looking at the behaviour, or Carolyn's going to be looking at the behaviour, particularly competition at the feeders. So there were cameras set up in the rearing sheds, and that measured or was able to record the behaviour of those, or record the animals 24/7. And so Carolyn's going to have the fun job of monitoring that video footage to try and figure out what was happening with those lambs. And so we're interested in how often they went to the feeder, how much bullying was going on at the feeder, was there a particular social hierarchy that was formed that was impacting on their ability to consume milk? Were there other things going on in the pens that we're not picking up just simply through milk intake? We're also, sorry about that. We're also looking at the health of the lambs, in particular disease transmission. So there was a lot of observations done on the health of those lambs right from the beginning when they first went into the rearing pens as well as to outside. And those lambs are going to be continued to be monitored as well. So we'll be able to see what the short, medium and long-term impacts may have been on the health and also on welfare. And so there was a number of other studies that Carolyn did that are giving an indication of whether their welfare has been compromised or not in these different operations, because I think it's really important that we understand what our rearing systems are doing for our animals, and we can also stand proud and say, hey, we're actually meeting the targets that we want, not just for productivity but for the welfare of our animals. So I think it's going to be some very interesting data that will come out of this in due course. And as I said, these animals are going to be continued to be monitored, so we'll be able to look at the longer term impacts. So I'd just like to acknowledge the staff at Spring Sheep, been fantastic letting us come and do the project on the farm. Great team to work with. So it's been a lot of fun. And also the team at Ruakura who have helped Carolyn with the study and will be helping more with the video footage and these animals, and to Linda. Thank you.